All right. And you hear me when I start singing. I'll turn it over from the Tony Michaels Show. Thank you, Julie Van Opel. Sponsoring is good. So there. Hey guys, welcome back. Those of you joining us from Tony Michaels, thank you. Those of you joining us from Hal Sparks, I believe there'll be some of you at some point. Thank you. And those of you just joining us from wherever you are in the world, thank you too. I am Cliff Schechter. I am coming to you from the Queen City, Radio City, a freezing frickin' cold city forever now. Cincinnati, Ohio, great town. State could be doing a lot better. I'm going to be honest with you. Lots of stuff to talk about today. It's a small plane, but we've had another plane crash. You know, those folks came over from Tony's place. We already did some talking about that. But it is essential to what I've written about, what I've talked about, which is the administrative state, the bureaucratic state from 100 years ago, starting more than that they're trying to tear down. Basically a state that was erected to safeguard democracy, place experts in positions where they belong and know something and can help us and prevent disaster, prevent things like people needlessly dying. There's a reason, and yeah, polio cure and some of those things were part of that reason, but there's a reason we went from like the average age during the 20th century, being like 50 something that people lived till about 80. Now we're headed back in the other direction. We'll also talk about Musk himself. Took some crap from some of you guys yesterday, but I'm sorry, I hate to say it, I was right. Dude was fired. And the reason you know he was fired is because Donald Trump insulted him today. So he didn't just imagine he was on Doge. We didn't just imagine we saw Donald Trump say he was running Doge. That all really happened. And then Trump got in a fit of pique, as he does, like when he pulls, when he decides that he's no longer going to let Mike Pompeo, who's one of the few stooges who actually endorsed him from the cabinet, one of the four, pulls his security because he's mad about something. Well, he's mad. Musk is getting Time Magazine and just had his 47th kid and getting lots of attention for all sorts of things. That one dumb little kid sitting on his shoulders, smacking him in the face, insulting Trump. Maybe he just got pissed because that kid had a much quicker wit than Trump. I don't know, but clearly, when you file a legal briefing saying, we don't know what this guy's saying, he's not running Doge nor a part of it, and then you follow that up with, we were looking when we were hiring there for somebody somebody smarter, and then you call him, yeah, he's just an advisor. You're insulting him. It was meant to be a humiliation for Elon Musk, and I enjoy every bit of it. But again, wasn't clickbaiting yesterday. Was just telling you what happened. On other notes, obviously you've seen the thumbnail, AOC just knocking it out of the park, and I don't feel like I've given her enough attention here. Sometimes I didn't in the past because I didn't agree with her and everything politically. I certainly found some of the things that she said when it came to war in the Middle East to be distasteful, I would say. There's certain charged language. You can go after Bibi Netanyahu and you can go after Israel, but there's certain charged language she's used, for example, that I think puts people like my family at risk. And yet overall, she's been the strongest force. I mean, Jasmine Crockett's up there and others, but my gosh, every day after I was busy putting together the thumbnail for AOC crushing that dork Homan, the guy that wants to basically round up everybody, probably stop if you don't have like Irish or Scottish skin, if you just sort of have middle European white skin, I think you're at risk, folks. If you tan well, I don't know. I'm pretty damn pale, so I may be okay. They'll throw me into a gulag for other reasons. And she made a fool of him, mocked him, ripped into him, showed she wasn't scared of him, and then went straight after JD Vance, mocked him, ripped him, showed she wasn't scared of him. This is like, can we have 100 or 1,000 of her? I mean, we do have Jasmine Crockett doing it. We've got Raskin doing it. Who did I see the other day? Who's back to their old tricks on the what do you call it? The committee with Jim Jordan, right? I'm trying to remember what's his name? Funny guy, Jewish representative from Florida. I can't think of his name right now. In any case, just having a moment. But there have been a lot of Democrats who've been speaking out more strongly. But my gosh, AOC is just constantly on fire. And we're going to go into that. Also, something you should know, and this may have happened. Moskowitz, thank you. Thank you. Who gave that to me? Dark Stabdu and Lynette Dobson and, other folks, thank you. Donald Trump has also, and this is, I believe, a breaking story right now, or at least from an hour or two ago, has seized control of independent agencies. Here we go, folks. New executive order will set up a court challenge over whether Trump has the power to direct investigations by independent agencies. That's right. Here we go. He wants to tell independent agencies that oversee corporations, labor unions, banks, and federal elections. He wants to sue Democrats for voting. He wants to sue labor unions for being labor unions. My guess is the banks and corporations will be just fine unless they're leaders, unless it's like a Patagonia or a Costco or somewhere where the CEO comes out in favor of Democrats and magically they'll investigate them. This is the very heart of a police state and the very heart of what fascism is. And courts obviously need to strike it down, and there need to be people that need to be willing to put their bodies between him and what he wants to do if it gets to that point. Because no, he doesn't get to tell independent agencies who to look into. He does not. He's not a king. He's not a dictator. He's nothing he thinks he is. Not a successful businessman, not a ladies' man, not a guy that can eat without getting food all over his face, not a guy that can walk 4 steps without getting winded. Ugh, he makes me sick. There may have been 1 or 2 other things we were going to get into. Oh, right. Gee, a small thing to all those Republicans who I'm sure aren't listening to this or watching this right now, but some of my Republican, people I've known, colleagues, let's call them, others who are, from the business Republican class. Donald Trump, he's just making a lot of noise, when it comes to Putin and Zelensky. Really? That's your take? That was your takeaway from the last 8 years? I already had these arguments with people before the election. That was your takeaway from his trying to use Ukraine, threaten them by keeping aid from them while also framing Joe Biden. That was, why he got impeached in the first place. That was your takeaway from their taking support for Ukraine out of the Republican platform in 2016, from the dirty with Russian, advisors, the Paul Manafort's sharing collusion, by the way, sharing polling information with Kilmanov, the Russian oligarch close to Putin, with all the head of the FBI in New York, who just magically said there was no connection between Trump and Putin, arrested himself for being tied to a Russian oligarch. And, I can go on and on forever about this. The performance in Finland, however many years ago, that was just pathetic. Well, now he's done exactly what I told all those people. They're like, oh, no. When he gets in office, he'll be different. He may insult Zelensky, but he's not going to go in with Putin. Yeah. Trump goes ballistic on, quote, dictator Zelensky, blaming him for the war and the death of millions. It's Zelensky's fault that he said Ukraine is our country and it's independent and we live in it. And you're not coming in here. It's not Russian. You're not putting a puppet government, which they voted out. That was Manafort's government, by extension, Trump. And now he is bashing him, trying to force him to some kind of a crappy peace treaty, going and sitting down with the Russians without any of the key players there, which would be Ukraine, countries surrounding Ukraine, and NATO, the rest of Western Europe, the EU, all of whom have said no, there will be no negotiating for peace without Ukraine there and without us there. Do you feel like testing Article 5, Don? Do you feel like seeing if France and the UK will launch against us? This is what my Republican friends who are like, everything's going to be okay, chose to vote for. You should look at yourselves in the mirror today and ask yourself if you know anything about politics and you ever should make political decisions again in your lives. And that's a lot of what we've got going on. I wish I'll try to find something humorous because most of it just frankly pisses me off. Well, the humorous part, of course, I think if we're going to, the sparklers are here. Hello, sparklers. Welcome. Welcome to our little get together where we talk about Trump betraying Ukraine and talk about Trump betraying, but this is good, Elon Musk. And we talk about AOC making that human thumb Homan. He does look like a thumb, doesn't he? Who's that, who's the guy who's just sitting there like literally drooling at the thought of arresting everybody who's doesn't have Scottish tinted skin and throwing them out of the country. She clapped back at him something fierce, and he lost it, man, got triggered on TV. It was fun. We can start with that. I thought Tony was maybe gonna come by, a little bit sooner, but why don't we start with the main story? Essentially, I mean, you know it, AOC has been crushing it since the beginning. And so she claimed that migrants will not be subject to unreasonable search and seizure. We do have something in our Constitution about unreasonable search and seizure, as you all know. And talked about the 14th Amendment. Amendment Republicans like to pretend is not there, especially certain articles of it that have to do with people that try to overthrow our government and to birthright citizenship. And she, of course, it is well within my duties to educate people on their rights. I'm going to do it. And I'm not going to let this bully in Homan go out and essentially lie to people, attack people, and make things up. And he then went on TV, and if you could see in the thumbnail I showed you all, looked really, really angry. Boy, is that guy not used to being challenged, particularly by a young Latina woman. Oh God, that must be tough for him, knowing especially that I'm sure I haven't looked up Homan's background. I'm sure everywhere he's gotten in life has been because of the color of his skin and who he's known. And here's somebody who actually earned their way up and could run circles around him charismatically, intellectually, and frankly run circles around him because he looks like he moves at about the same pace as Donald Trump walking down a ramp. So she just kept going. He tried to accuse her of impeding law enforcement efforts, and she just started ripping him and said, he can threaten me with jail. He can call me all the names that he wants. He's got nothing. I love it. Like, he's got nothing line. That's the De Niro line from Untouchables. And he got triggered, blew up on TV. So the thing that really made him lose it again is she'd used the sarcastic font. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Some capitals, some non-capitals. When he threatened her to tweet out, maybe she's going to be in trouble now. Maybe he can learn to read. The Constitution would be a good place to start. Excellent. She just slapped his arse back, and he's not used to being talked about that way. And not used to people not being scared of him. And he threatens the DOJ, and she laughs it off. Why can't we have all Democrats doing this, standing up and doing this? We have many, again, not everybody's effectively as she is, but we've got our Jasmine Crockett's and our Eric Swalwells and our Dan Goldmans and folks who are doing some of this, but we need more. Chris Murphy's been terrific, right? Jamie Raskin's been terrific. Brian Schatz has been terrific. Tammy Duckworth. I can keep going, but like we could use more. Then she retweeted him on Twitter and said, when he confirmed on Fox that he asked the DOJ to investigate her, she just said, go ahead, let the people see you for what you are, which again was understated compared to her mockery of his ability to read. And look at that. She even held a webinar explaining rules to people. What a terrible congresswoman. Somebody who believes in doing their duty, doing what they were elected for, and actually explaining to people the important things so that they know their rights and they know our values. And that was pretty much the end of their exchange. He's still probably somewhere in a corner whining and crying about it, a little tubby whatever wad that he is. Then she decided to rip into JD Vance, our goofy garden gnome looking vice president who had no experience except for kissing Peter Thiel's large arse before moving back to Ohio and suddenly running for the Senate. And now he's vice president, doesn't know anything. Do you know he went and lectured Europe on democracy? They need a lecture from him. Okay. Yes. Right. How about you stick to chicken fried steak and they'll stick to understanding democracy? That could work. She flat out went after him, Vance, on Twitter and said, you lied to the world in Munich. If this administration believed in free speech as you claimed, its leaders wouldn't be threatening members of Congress with criminal investigations for educating the public about their constitutional rights. Look in the mirror, she added. I think she forgot that A, if he does see his own reflection, that would be quite gruesome. And B, I think he's a vampire, so he probably doesn't. And so now she's got both Homan and JD Vance, the Whitey McWhites, these two complete losers, these nothings who are only serving in administrations because it's a Trump administration. And again, you could be half a dead plant and serve in that administration. Look at the people who've ended up in there. So AOC, thumbs up, keep crushing them, keep ripping them, give them no quarter, give them no respect. You communicate to people when you do this. I've talked about this before, but the messaging part of this is important to me. When you laugh at them and mock them, you communicate to people that you don't take them seriously and that they shouldn't take them seriously either. When you rip into them and you stand strong to their threats, you communicate to people that you have strength, that their threats are worthless, and that it gives other people courage to stand up. So the words that she chooses, the manner in which she chooses to do it, and she is an expert at this, like on social media in general, but also, I mean, the use of video going on, the cable shows, she's fantastic at this. She knows they're watching her. You know, half of them are creepily attracted to her and make that quite obvious. And the other half just, you know, hate her because she's smarter and better than they are. And there's a big Venn diagram where those two groups cross. So again, keep it going. Lead the way, AOC. And frankly, again, to some of those folks who've been there for way too long, are stuck in their Reagan crouch and don't seem to know what year it is and what issues are popular and who's popular and who's not, and that Donald Trump has the worst approval rating for a president, newly elected president in 50, 60, 70 years, except for himself the first time. That they have a bare majority in the House. That, no, don't be scared of this. And they've put people that are dumb enough, incompetent enough, and frankly, corrupt enough that we'll see how many of them last in the positions that they're in. She's been fantastic. More from Stephen Manning, more Brian chats, less Chuck Schumer and Steny Hoyer. Yes, 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 and yes. I really thank you, as you always do, for this, Cynthia. Remember, folks, to please like and subscribe. Just under 104,000. Can you get me there? Can you get me there? Last I looked, it was 103, 870 or 880. How about if you're here, you're not subscribed, and you're here through, you know, YouTube, subscribe on YouTube. If you're on Twitch and you can become a subscriber or a member there, please do that. Please support us. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Carolina Childers. We'll get to the folks kind enough to with super chats. That's really kind in a little bit. You know, again, just to get back to where we were, like Hakeem, you know, again, and I've tried to sort of not get into all of this because but I don't know what's going on. No Democratic leader in the House, whether it's Hakeem Jeffries or anybody else, can operate with Nancy Pelosi there kind of looking over their shoulder as a former leader. Nancy Pelosi, if you went back to 2006, 8, around then, honestly, folks, she should be on the Mount Rushmore when it comes to legislating, when it comes to counting votes. She was brilliant and she accomplished a lot for us. But that doesn't give you a free pass when you're becoming a hindrance. You need to know when maybe you're done. And I'm sorry, but I don't like this. Like Trump hung around, right, to run for the next election. And don't think I'm comparing Nancy Pelosi to Trump in any way. But I am saying, like, when you're a leader, you should, when you're done, you should move on. And Hoyer is in that. Schumer is still there and leader, but he's not the right guy for the moment. And I don't know how he doesn't know this or how enough people haven't told him this. Dick Durbin makes Chuck Schumer look like George the Animal Steel, if you get that reference. I mean, probably the weakest judiciary chairman ever. The guy wouldn't even call Clarence Thomas and demand that he show up in front of him. There's so much to look into in the Supreme Court, and we had this guy running that committee. Folks, just leave. You're from states like New York and Illinois, where we can elect hard-hitting, great Democrats. You don't have it anymore. Okay. If you did for this moment, maybe it's, it may not even be age. It may just be this is a moment that you're not prepared for because that's not how you're made. Fine. There are plenty of things I can't do in life. If I tried to sit together and put any kind of a formula together in a lab doing chemistry, I would blow it up. So I'm not a chemist. If you cannot effectively communicate, cannot effectively message, aren't willing to do it every day, aren't willing to hit them hard, aren't willing to point out their hypocrisy, aren't willing to do it in ways that will create spectacle and get media attention, aren't willing to hold up bills on the floor, but by not giving unanimous consent, aren't willing to stand up and make a statement on the floor, no matter if they rule you to shut up or not, like Representative Stansberry did. If you're not willing to do all of these things, please move aside for those of us who will so we can save the republic. Okay? Because we're seeing a lot of those folks. And the whole Democratic Party is being labeled by the ones who are right now, for the most part, are in leadership and won't let us, or those looking over leadership's shoulder. I'm sorry, I don't want to have to say any of this stuff. In the past, on gay rights issues, on gun safety, like Chuck Schumer was one of our biggest allies when I was working on some of those issues, was a hero on that stuff. Okay. Fought really hard on that stuff. It's not to say the man's never done anything good, but again, I can't just look back at oh, well, you did great things in the past. If we end up becoming what Donald Trump and Elon Musk want us to become, nothing you ever did will matter. It won't show up in the history books. There won't be any. There'll be propaganda written. Enough. That wasn't a rant I was looking to go on, but I'm getting really more and more frustrated by this, that these folks do not know their place and can't take a look and put their damn ego aside for the sake of the country and say what's necessary. Some program notes, folks. So I told you we've got, I'll give you another hint today and spill all the beans tomorrow. We're going to have, for my big Substack newsletter launch, I've already got a Substack newsletter, but I've long had an online one on email, and these are going to be combined into a greater force than the world has ever seen. No, it's going to be a really good thing for reaching a lot of people at Substack. Tuesday is going to be a big day that way, and I'm going to do a live stream from there. And I'll give you more details on that as we move on Thursday. So I asked you to please subscribe to Substack, because it's going to get fun on Tuesday. You don't want to miss the fun. We're still, will there be prizes, Francie? We can find prizes for everything. I need to come up, and we've talked to Veronica about this. I need to get some prizes for all sorts of folks for things. I think we just need to have more contests. And yes, also on Patreon. Again, that's what allows me to do as much video as I do, to provide you with some extra videos, some extra posts, stickers that I know that Veronica sent out to people. One of you folks very kindly was very thankful and posted it up at Blue Sky, actually. Hold on. You deserve credit, Eric Wayant, for the awesome cliffhanger sticker that you got. We've got other stuff like that coming your way. Please, door prizes. Interesting, Jim. We're going to create a structure. I'm talking to Veronica today about a bunch of stuff tied into that launch. So maybe we should have some prizes tied into that launch. What do you think? It's going to be free, but we all are going to be launching the paid version too. So you're going to get a lot of stuff for free there, most of it. But there's going to be some extra stuff. I'm going to have some, I can't go into now, but semi-celebrity types joining us. And one, big name former anchor joining probably what we're going to be doing in general. And that should be cool. But yeah, maybe, so there's gonna be some of the stuff that will be for paid stuff. And right now I've got it set up so for people that want to join the paid, it's 50% off. So it would normally be $8 a month. It's $4 a month. what I will probably, and that'll be through the opening and whatever. What I will do is we will get a bunch of prizes together for people to win. So if you're the 10th paid subscriber, if you're the 47th, if you're the whatever, prizes. And I think we can monitor that. So I'm going to talk to Veronica about that. The Patreon is very affordable. Thank you. Thank you for that, Francie. Again, look, again, I mean, I could joke and say we're living in a material world and I'm a material girl, but that's not true. We are living in a world where things cost things. I do have a mortgage and I do have kids to send to college, and it just comes down to like, I wish I didn't have to charge for any of this. I do hope the Substack takes off in a big enough way that then I won't even have to ask for super chats and that kind of stuff here. But it is what it is for all the stuff I'm doing. And I got here yesterday to get on a Zoom at 7:30 in the morning. I was up till 1 a.m. last night working. And I consider that a long day. I don't know. Some of you may work longer days, but I've been working my butt off to try to get all of this done. And so I'm going to try to keep everything as reasonable as possible. I'm not trying to gouge anybody, but if you can afford to sign up for one of the higher levels, you'll get awesome perks. If you want to get something signed by me, you want to do get your comments read out loud here definitively, guaranteed, but you want me to make a video for you or somebody personally you care about, you want phone call, Zoom, lunch, hell, we'll do whatever. Signed copy of my book, which may be somewhat out of date. It's pretty funny. The other day, somebody attacked me. I was on Stephanie Miller's show. Somebody attacked me. He was like, that guy's trying to give advice to Democrats. I think it was probably somebody from the left. And look, he's got a book on McCain on his shelf. That was awesome. I meant to get back to that guy. I haven't done it yet. I'm like, yeah. So you focused in on the McCain book. Did you happen to, look at the bottom part of it and maybe see what the author was? Maybe try to figure out if it was a pro-McCain book or not. In any case, people are funny. So yes, I hope that that you all can do as many of these things as possible, and I try to make pricing as fair as possible. But again, I got to be able to do this stuff too. I got to be able to make a living, and there's a lot of hours that go into. I have to prep for these live streams in addition to doing them. I haven't had the time lately because I lost my editor to even do the medium-sized videos. I just got a new editor, so we're going to start putting some of those out there again. Those takedown videos. Been doing some shorts. Trying to do stuff on Substack. Prepare for the launch. I've mentioned you. I have a sick mom. Like this is it's not simple. Well, crap. Tony Michaels said he doesn't have the link. No wonder he can't come in here. Hold on, dude. Sending it. How did I not send him the link? Guys, I'm not that bright. I'm just going to warn you about that. Don't fall for any facade that I may be a smart human, because I'm not. 1 second. And hopefully he will come and join us. I'm going to really threaten him kind of thing. Like I'm Elon and he's like somebody's social security. You know what I mean? All right. Now let's see what happens. Although we are late in the show. Oh, he's here because I got him the link and he was able to come in and look at him hitting his head.
No, I've been sitting here waiting to see if I was going to get on Cliff's show today, but I thought he was like, the hell with Tony. It's not worth it.
I like all the cool people here, and you are all cool. I appreciate it. They say very nice things about me when I insult myself. And I insult myself mostly as a goof.
But I shouldn't self-deprecating humor.
Yeah, but I should insult myself all the time because look at all these nice things. Like WW, he's not your normal, smart, handsome, bearded boy. Wow, look at that. I'm abnormal, but I am smart and handsome and bearded. Those are 3 cool things.
Oh,
Jim
okay.
Williams told me, "Cliff, you're human. You're not perfect." Absolutely, Jim.
What did you get
And
wrong? Did you do something wrong? Did you do
yeah, I
something
didn't
wrong
send
that
you the link, so I made fun of myself.
Oh, I see.
I'm
I
like,
see. I
guys, I
see.
may
I
seem like
see.
I'm smart, but don't fall for it.
I see.
I honestly, I appreciate everything. You guys just show how awesome you are, but I'm always
Well,
joking with that.
to be perfectly honest, yesterday I forgot to send Cliff the link to my show because I thought it was Monday yesterday when I was getting my show ready instead of Tuesday. Because I just get my days mixed around and mix them together. I don't know if it's been this month has been a long decade if no one's been counting. So I
We were
got
talking
mine
about that when I
yesterday.
was on. Again, like, and I think everybody feels that way. We were talking about that when I went on Stephanie Miller's show on Tuesday. We were sitting there, and Stephanie's like, "What day is it? What month is it?" I think she'd actually lost track. Like, I don't even think she was joking. We're just like, where the hell are we? What is
Right.
like Trump time? The only thing I could come up with is Trump time is like time in Interstellar. You
Right.
know what I'm
Well,
saying?
and we are in the timeline where Biff gets the almanac. Like that's the timeline.
We are.
We're in that skewed. We're in the Back to the Future 2 timeline when they come back
You're
after
totally
the
right.
all. Yeah, that's where we're at.
And you know what's the worst part about that? Is
What?
in our version, we got the almanac back and away from him and reset things for 4 years. And then he found a way to come back and steal the almanac again.
Right. He's got his own flux capacitor somewhere. I don't know where the
Right.
hell it is.
He found a way. Somebody put together, there was, maybe he went to the 1950s dock and held him hostage. You know what I mean?
I
Made him,
guess. I don't
who
know.
knows? But like, you're right. And it's amazing to me that again, I still find it amazing with all of the jokes out there around Donald Trump, with a guy that danced around in like what was it, a yellow suit with chickens, and a guy endorsed all these ridiculous products that were a joke and bragged about serial infidelity and the bankruptcies, and then even before we knew about the criminal activity, although I always kind of assumed it, but and all of that, they based that character. They said the Biff Tannen character. They based it on Donald Trump. I don't know
Yeah,
if you know that.
that one character where he's got
specific
the
Biff
almanac.
character who gets powerful and runs a
Right.
place, that was based on Donald Trump, right down to the hair. It was perfect.
Right.
Like,
Well, that actually makes me think a little bit because we were talking on the phone yesterday about this, that the right understands that you have to entertain first, right? Like people don't want to pay attention to stuff that they don't want to pay attention to. So sometimes you got to really have a shiny object to distract them into paying attention to the thing you want them to that they won't otherwise. And Ronald Reagan is a good case, a case study in this. Ronald Reagan ran a lot of failed presidential campaigns. But then in 1980, he was running against Jimmy Carter, who was a great person, but he was a micromanager, which caused him to not be as good of a manager president as he was a person,
right.
probably.
I'd say he had great ideas, but he fought with a Democratic Congress because he was such a micromanager. You're right. That's fair.
And
fair.
And it left him very vulnerable. He made himself vulnerable in that way. And probably the reason why is because Jimmy Carter really wasn't he wasn't inherently a politician. He was just such a big personality and so many people liked him. He became a politician with ease. But Ronald Reagan was kind of the opposite. Ronald Reagan was like a B or C actor. And the way that the country really knew him is he was hawking products. Like that's what Ronald Reagan's biggest shtick was. That's what the biggest paycheck that he got from his Hollywood career is. He went on to making these shitty movies to being one of the top endorsement faces out there.
When commercials are like 5 minutes long, he would stand up and be like,
exactly.
GM is, blah, 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 blah. And was it GM or GE? I forget. One or the other. Right. He stood up. I think it may have been GE.
He would do all kinds of endorsements for all kinds of, like pomades and just anything that Ronald Reagan could grift, he would grift. And it's what kind of gave him this national voice. And then he would go on radio programs and he would start talking about the, dismantling government and big government's the bad guy. And, that narrative really caught on.
That's what I've talked about a lot on here, because the language that we need to throw off, and we have been over the last decade or two. I mean, for a while, liberal was a bad word. You know what I mean?
Right.
They demonized so much of what, and we still, when it comes to bureaucracy, the government, that, I mean, again, that's why he's ground zero. I blame him. When it comes to the anti-government fervor where we are now, I blame him because he was the one that made it.
And the reason why you should is because he was entertaining. He was entertaining to a degree, and he could capture people's attention because he was well known. Because you got to remember, there's only back then there was 3 networks, and so all the commercials were aired on those 3 networks. So you couldn't not but see Ronald Reagan in these endorsements.
And that's when
what
like
made
40
him
million
super
people
famous.
would watch a TV show.
Exactly. Right. And so when you had that component, and then he would go on local AM stations and be talking about politics, they really listened in because he was famous. He was all over the TV. We're supposed to believe what Ronald Reagan says because he's an entertainer, and he would do it in an entertaining way, and his language and his cadence.
You know what else
pattern.
he did, Tony?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you know what else he did?
I mean, he divorced his first wife for his second wife.
Well, yeah, he divorced his first wife, which they, of course, said was sinful and whatever, that. But but no, I was getting at the fact that he also hosted a radio show for a while. So
yes, yeah,
he hosted. It was, I think, a sports radio show in Illinois before he moved out where he was from. Before he moved out to California to become an actor.
He was a broadcaster.
So good on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, having a broadcasting talent and an acting talent, and basically, he whatever you think of him, and I think very, very many bad things about him. I've made it clear, but if he was an angry person, you didn't see it the way you do with Trump. So he came off as this likable old guy, who you could trust. He'd been on the radio. He'd been an actor. He'd been pitching products. Who wouldn't believe him? So even though he went in 1980 to kick off his campaign, where? Philadelphia, Mississippi, where the 3 civil rights workers were kidnapped and murdered, and where an all-white jury let off all of the folks who did it, so that the federal civil rights division had to come in and prosecute them on civil rights violations charges. Jesse Helms took him down there to kick off his campaign. He very purposely did some evil, evil things, but he always did it with a smile on his face. And he always was jovial and saying nice things, and that made it a lot harder, for people to see what he was, to see that
just like Donald Trump, he knew how to stoke white grievance. And I've got one more thing to add to this, in some of the similarities between Trump and Ronald Reagan, and not really the people, but more the movement and how they got this stuff going. Is Republicans actually hated Ronald Reagan. They did not like him. The establishment Republicans did not like him. And case in point, he made George H.W. Bush his vice president. And the reason why is because of the words voodoo economics. H.W. Bush had a lot of power in government. He had a lot of influence. And the way that Reagan kind of handicapped H.W. Bush at the time because of the voodoo economics, a comment during a debate, he made him his vice president. So that he was
if you promise people massive tax, particularly at that time, if you promise people massive tax cuts, it's all, now at least people can look up certain information, not that a lot of them do when they need to, but it was a very easy thing to remember. Supply side economics was drawn up by a right-wing idiot who was the Wall Street Journal, one of the editors there, literally on a napkin in a bar. And I'm not BSing you. That is true. That's not apocryphal. That is a true story. And it was just a curve he drew up, like, well, if we do this, and it really was him as an economist doing what we've seen so many professionals do when they become Republicans, whether they're foreign service workers, military, economists, doctors, which is trade away everything they ever claimed to believe in, to become part of the Borg and to get power. And, what was his name?
Hail Hydra?
Jan Winiski, yes, was the one who did it. And so you're exactly right. People don't know that history, but people saw Reagan the way they looked at Reagan as another Goldwater. He was too conservative. He was going to get crushed. Right. So just think about a Republican Party. Try to picture in your mind a Republican Party like that, because I know it's very hard right now to picture a Republican Party establishment that actually had some power and could get together and say, this guy's too far to the right. We need a moderate or we're going to lose. And so They supported Nelson Rockefeller over him. They supported Gerald Ford eventually when he ended up becoming president after Nixon over him, and even Nixon moved to the middle, who'd been the right winger as a vice president under Eisenhower, moved to the middle to combat Reagan, to be more of the moderate, to be center right. I mean, people forget this. And again, Nixon was horrible, but he did found the EPA. Like, he did actually do a couple good things, along the way.
You know what? We owed Richard Nixon a little bit of an apology, but we should scorn Gerald Ford, because if Gerald Ford would have stood out of the way and let the Justice Department prosecute Richard Nixon, Donald Trump would not exist.
No,
we would not have that problem. Actually, Bill Clinton probably would have resigned in the late 90s, and Al Gore would have been
president. There's a couple
president.
key moments in our history where if certain things I think had gone differently, if one person had made a different decision, we would be in a whole different place right now. And I view
we would be in the original timeline, not the Biff Tannen almanac timeline.
Right. Well, I view Gerald Ford as somebody who actually was a good person, was moderate, was a pro-choice Republican. Find one of those these days.
He was actually he was the unelected president. Like, he was the unelected president, because he was never elected vice president or president. He was the Speaker of the House, which means he won a congressional district, and then he won the election in the House, and he became the president of the United States.
Yeah, no, only one we've had. But if you look at, the way there are Betty Ford clinics, like, they're very open about her addiction, and he fought to put more money into addiction, like preventative services, and not just chucking people in prison. Ford did actually a number of decent things. So what happens is, in 76, he's an incumbent, and Reagan challenges him and comes a hair short of defeating him in the primaries, because all of those folks lined up behind Gerald Ford, the establishment of the party.
The incumbent, and because incumbency matters, I mean, especially in the two-party system that we have.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then when it's a huge advantage, one of the biggest advantages you could have. And then I don't think it was quite as big for Ford, because he'd inherited it rather than being elected to it.
Exactly.
It still was an advantage, and Reagan almost overcame it. And then by 1980, there was no stopping Reagan, because the guy from the middle who was an incumbent ran and lost. And now, and we're in stagflation and all this other, things were not going typically that well. We were in a crime wave that was crazy. Well,
and Jimmy Carter, Jimmy Carter was a horrible manager. He was a decent person. He was a good president, but he was a horrible manager. And the country understood that, I think.
Oh, and somebody in there, I don't know if you're saying this in the chat there, like, poor Ford in all caps. I mean, if you're saying that in a sarcastic way, I'm not sitting here feeling sorry for Ford. I'm saying we would have been better off as a country if we'd had him instead of Reagan. I don't feel sorry for people. Like, I remember so many people being like, crying, feeling so sorry and crying over what happened with Hillary Clinton. And my response to that was, I got to meet her. I think she was a terrific public servant. She was amazing. She was a Secretary of State, First Lady of Arkansas, First Lady of the United States, U.S. Senator, Secretary of State, presidential candidate. Brilliant, fantastic, wonderful, fought for children for years, Children's Defense Fund and all that kind of stuff and whatever. So even though what happened to her sucks, like, when people were acting like, it had ended her world, I would always sort of be like, let's put this all in perspective. She should have been president. We would be better off if she were president, but her life's going to be okay. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like she's had an amazing life. And so, and then when you bring up George H.W. Bush, Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris, who maybe would have to vie of everybody I can think of, and I may be missing people, for when it comes to presidential candidates, the most experienced. You may not have liked George H.W. Bush. Certainly was a hell of a lot better than his son or Reagan or Trump, but he'd run the CIA. He'd been the ambassador to China. He'd been the ambassador.
He was a bureaucrat. He'd
been the ambassador to the UN. He was an elected congressman.
He was a war hero. He was a war hero. You can give him that one.
And he volunteered, got shot down at the age of something like 16, 17, and he was vice president for 2 terms. So, I mean, you couldn't argue he wasn't experienced enough, and he'd always been a moderate. Do you know what his nickname was? Here's what I'll get you with. You know what his nickname was in the House? Just to let you know, again, how different the Ford George H.W. wing was before H.W. sold out a number of stuff to be Reagan's VP. Do you know what his nickname was in the House?
I do not actually. That is
You're going to love this. His nickname was Rubbers because he pushed so much for planning pregnancies and for birth control. Like he was a WASP from Connecticut who ended up in Texas to find oil. He was liberal socially on everything. And then of course,
even on immigration, he was liberal.
Yes,
there's a great debate between H.W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, I believe in 1980, where they are talking about immigration. I believe they are in Houston. I believe so. It's one
of those conventions was there. I don't remember which one.
And they had a debate there, and they were debating, and they both had the same stance on immigration. Is like, when they come across the border, we should treat them like humans because they're humans. Like, well, because
humanize them. Reagan, and it caused us to do a lot of terrible things. Don't get me wrong. And the same thing with it was, because there was part of that vision was certainly neocon vision and led to Iraq and things that were terrible. But it also led to taking some responsibility that we needed to be active in the world, that we didn't sit around and gripe that NATO countries aren't paying enough into that. Like they realized that the security of the world that NATO provided was worth paying whatever the hell we needed into it. I mean,
right, just so it protected us.
Right. We disproportionately paid to rebuild Japan and Germany. Well, that ended up being a pretty damn good
after we destroyed them.
Those are two of the strongest democracies in the world right now. A hell of a lot stronger than ours. That ended up being a pretty good investment. So the point is that they understood that part of the equation. I'm not going to say they weren't very wrong on other parts, but at least they understood that part of it. And
they knew how to win elections. You could say that Ronald Reagan, because I don't know, a lot of people say that Ronald Reagan was a racist, and if you talk to his son Ron Reagan, he would probably tell you different. He would just say he knew how to win elections, right? And that was the difference between politics then and politics now, is that politics then they really did use these things to win elections, but at the end of the day, they were, as far as policy goes, they tried to be level-headed, right? They tried to understand that, hey, we can't just upend the entire system because we said we would.
Well, right? they may have been wrong about a lot of stuff, but they believed. The big difference, it's right there, is very fundamental. They actually believed in policy. Even Reagan, who was attacking the government, guess who created the Veterans Administration? Pretty big bureaucracy and cabinet department was added under Reagan. Guess what? Guess who gave amnesty to I don't remember how many undocumented workers here? Reagan. Guess who raised taxes as many times as he cut them? I mean, we can go through the whole thing. I know, that's part of history I know the best. So point being, it doesn't mean
that's the stuff they like to ignore when they hold Reagan on a pedestal.
But some of the stuff he set in motion, the selfishness, the rejecting the public good of democracy, which he did around taxes, but then it became about all sorts of other things too. The cultural forces Reagan unleashed were terrible. And George H.W. Bush, as Jim was saying in there, from old money and all of that. Yeah, I mean, Brown Brothers Harriman, the old that was their family, the old investment bank on Wall Street. I mean, they went back even in this state. Barbara Bush was from, I believe, Northeast Ohio, but her family was. You know what her do we use maiden name anymore, or is that not PC? Whatever. Her original name.
Give a shit.
I don't know. Her original name was
Mm-hmm.
Barbara Pierce. She was from the Pierce family, as in Franklin Pierce, who was a president of the United States. They were as old line WASP as you could get. And that meant they were very liberal. They were sort of like the church, they belonged to the kinds of churches like the Episcopalian one, where you had that Booty, or I still don't know if I'm saying her name right, and I'm attacking her or not.
Yes. The minister that chastised Trump in front of his face. Yeah.
That tradition of Presbyterianism, Episcopalianism,
I like the word WASP. It's waspy. She was waspy when she was going after Trump.
They were all.
She was waspy.
All of them.
But that's funny because where I come from, there are no WASP. Like, we know what a WASP is. We know what waspy people are. That's what we think of as kind of pretentious elitist is these waspy people, right?
Well, I want to thank Epigirl for giving me the proper. So it should be its birth name or name at birth. That is what I shall use.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. So I like to ask questions when I don't know. But I mean, again, but the problem is, of course, he was pro-choice and he became anti-choice. I mean, the guy that was nicknamed Rubbers in the House became anti-choice because Reagan needed him as VP, and the nutty lifers were first gaining control with the moral majority and others, which was created in '78 of the Republican Party. So Bush had to come out against, gay rights. He had to come out against birth control, had to come out against abortion rights, women's equality in the workplace.
It's the same thing Trump did. Trump in the late '90s was for gun reform. He was for women's choice. Right during the 2016 election, they asked, I think it was Matt Lauer, asked him on the morning show, asked him if transgender people would be able to use the bathrooms in Trump Tower, and he said yes. He said, yeah, they can use whatever bathroom they use. He doesn't care.
Yep. No, that's what I mean. It was different.
Right.
Right. And as we have atrocious.
Well, I mean, Trump had to move, and that's why Trump isn't grounded in any real principle.
No,
most politicians like Trump and Reagan aren't. That and H.W. Bush, to the credit of politicians, they will move their ideology to get elected. And again, that's why I say they understand how to get elected.
But
they understand how to get elected.
Yeah, I disagree on one.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to point out that now it's atrocious at every game. See, atrocious at every game, and it makes fun of himself or herself too. So you guys better make this person feel better. Like when I insult myself. But Reagan was pro-choice as governor. Yes, Reagan passed what was literally the most pro-choice law in the entire land of California before Roe versus Wade. There are a couple states that legalized abortion before Roe passed the Supreme Court. New York did.
Because it was popular. Because it was popular.
Yes, because it was popular. And Reagan signed one of, he was terrible in certain other stuff, right? Somebody in there pointed out how much he cut mental health funding by, and that's why there was a great joke in the movie Airport where they show or Airplane, where they show the main character has to go to like what they would then have called an insane asylum. Again, probably not what we're calling it today. And it was called the Ronald Reagan Home for the Mentally Ill was the name of it. So they got a nice little jab at him there, and for the fact that he seemed towards the end of his second term to be losing it a little bit, but also because he cut mental health so much. But point being that, again, none of these guys are perfect. A lot of these Republicans are terrible on a lot of things. I'm not making the point. I'm only making the point that, and this is where I differ with you a little bit, Tony, is that Reagan and H.W. Bush and even George W. Bush had some basic beliefs. They were flexible on a lot of stuff. Right?
You mean they had grounded principles in like liberal democracy, lowercase L, liberal democracy.
And they were bad on a lot of stuff, particularly George W. Bush. But even George W. Bush, when they rejected the immigration bill, he stood up and he was pro-immigration reform. You know what I mean? Like he wouldn't give into that. Even though he
also pushed back on trickle-down economics. He called it voodoo economics.
Well, that was Bush Sr. I'm talking about Bush Jr.
Oh, I'm sorry.
George W., George W. after 9/11 came out and said, Islam is a religion of peace. Now that he went and invaded Iraq and was freaking horrible. So I'm not sitting here trying to make him into a hero.
Well, and I think W. Bush. I think W. though in that. At that moment in time, he needed Americans together, not divided. So the last thing he needed was violence to break out in America, because now non-Muslim people thought that the Muslims were the enemy, and they were started attacking Muslim Americans, right? Which we as strategery, as he would say, for our country. Strategery. Strategery.
He needed a strategery. I can get George W. Bush.
He needed strategery to make sure that Americans didn't seem to be anti-Muslim, that it was more pro-democracy, because that's kind of the little bit of the lie they sold, was that we're going to go make them democracies.
Of course.
Is what we're going to do.
Oh, yeah. Remember, Dick Cheney told us they're going to throw chocolates and flowers at us in the streets.
Right.
And he was a little bit off. Not
just a little bit. Yeah.
And flowers, more like IEDs and hand grenades.
Right.
We're close.
Maybe they came out of a box of chocolates. That's where they were storing them. I don't know.
And so again, like, I'm just trying to give an objective, whatever. I'm not arguing for any of these people. I'm actually more arguing for the devolution and eventual destruction as it's happened, because I don't believe the Republican Party is a party anymore. To be a political party in a democracy, you have to have actual policies you advocate for. Again, even George W. Bush came in and said, I'm going to push No Child Left Behind. Now, was it short-sighted and stupid? It treated all students like they were the same. Like giving more federal funding to schools, terrific. I'm all for that. But you need to go into districts and find out what their unique challenges are and address that instead of having
it's the reason why we have local school boards,
right?
Essentially,
instead of a one-size-fits-all test. So he did it wrong, but it was the right. At least he was trying to.
He had a policy. He actually had a policy. Instead of, we're just going to do away with education. No one needs to learn. It's not a good thing. Look at me. I didn't learn anything, and I'm the president of the United States. You know, so.
Right. And I'm not sitting here saying, like, I'm just seeing in political scientists, those who actually have PhDs, degrees, unlike me, would say this to you. I've seen them, plenty of them say it. Timothy Schneider, who's talked about fascism, whatever, he's like, has come out and said numerous times, the Republican Party is no longer a functioning political party in a democracy. It is a political party in a North Korea or in a Russia or in a China or a place like that. It is the party that is all about power. All it exists to do is have members of the party, who get together and share the same hellish view of the world and gain power. Whatever lies you need to tell, whatever they are they are a party that normally exists in a dictatorial state. That is what they are. They're just not they don't have policy. Like there will be a policy problem. They'll demagogue it and say, it either doesn't exist or it exists because of Joe Biden or it exists because of DEI or whatever it is they say. And they'll give you either no solution to it or a solution that's patently laughable, right? Like, we're going to build the wall. Look, it's going to be a great, beautiful wall. It's going to stop people. And you're like, well, that's funny because kind of like your wife who flew into this country and didn't have the proper papers to be working here, and your buddy Elon, they came in by airplane and stayed. That is how most people who are here illegally are. That is how most of your undocumented workers are here. They came here for education or short-term work permits and then just disappeared and stayed here. So I'd love to know how that wall is going to stop them. I mean, maybe that's what they're doing with the FAA. That's a dark joke. I shouldn't make that joke. Stopping students from flying in here. I don't know. But
I will tell you, I will say it is kind of strange that Donald Trump launched his political career about trying to get someone's birth certificate because he claimed they were born in Africa. And then there's an actual guy who is actually born in Africa who is now controlling him. I just find it,
the irony of everything.
Does anyone see the irony in that? Does anyone?
There's so much of it. I have to one quick program note, which I should have told folks earlier, but we got into such a interesting conversation. This is actually going to be a very short stream. I apologize. I had to jump into emergency duty to pick up my son and take him to some lessons today, and it means that in about 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay.
I
thought you were gonna say what my problem was at the end of my show, that you had to go to the bathroom or something. That you're like, no emergency.
I mean,
I gotta poo
right now. I would just have you keep talking to everybody.
I could hold the audience for a couple minutes.
I'm not worried about that.
I've been known to do that before.
I somehow, knowing you, bet you have.
Yeah.
No,
I do enjoy coming here though and discussing a little bit of context of history, because I think it falls a lot short, not a little short, but a lot short with some of the media that we have out there, is that they really don't give any kind of context that they know about the history of our country, just contemporary history, even after JFK was shot and killed, which is and Martin Luther King Jr., which was two magnificently huge tragedies in our country, no matter which end of the political spectrum you are. And I mean, it really shook the country loose.
Oh, of course. That was that with Watergate and all of that is, Vietnam. My background, what I was studying when I was heading towards being a professor, was 20th century American history, and it was the rise of the right. So that's why I know a lot about these whack jobs. And even about some of the more obscure ones. We could talk about Paul Weyrich, who worked for the Coors guys and created ALEC, that lobbying group that goes state to state like a bunch of locusts and works with Republican state legislators to frack and, and to raise taxes on poorer folks while they cut them for the rich and all the other stuff. I mean, I had to do all of that stuff. So, I mean, history, I think right now, you want to understand this period. Some of this will sound ominous, but it is what it is. You should do your best to understand American history. First of all, around the 1930s and 60s, when we were in periods of deep upheaval. Obviously, the Civil War would be another one of those periods. Those 3 periods of time.
What was it about the Civil War that made this upheaval? What was it about that?
There was it was economic, man. It was the war between the states. Don't you know that?
Yeah, right.
You know
It was the economics of slavery. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, it was actually, it was exactly like your average MAGA idiot today. To prove to you that the racist demagogues, the wealthy racist demagogues, the billionaire class, if you will, back then they were only the multimillionaire class. They've been doing this forever. Because again, I don't want to keep asking you stuff. I'm not asking you stuff to try to make you look bad, Tony, because most people don't know. Most people did not know that George H.W. Bush's nickname was Rubbers.
Right. Well, and I probably have heard that before, but I didn't have it.
So I'll just say this: what most people do not know: 1% of Southerners owned slaves. 1%. The rest of them are too poor to.
Well,
They called it waving the bloody shirt back then, because they'd wave a shirt, their bloody shirt, like the Northerners, those damn Yankees came in here, corrupt Northerners with their industrialism, and they killed your brother, and they killed your neighborhood, and then people would volunteer and go fight for rich people who owned slaves when they never were ever going to own any themselves, because they were never going to be that wealthy.
You know what's a great dramatization of actually of that point is the State of Jones. I think that's what it's called. It's Matthew McConaughey. It's got Matthew McConaughey in it, and it is Southerners who are not slave owners who did not join the Confederacy, and the reason why is because they did not own slaves, and they understood that they were trying to brainwash people into getting into their war, which all it did was benefit the rich white people in the South, the 1% in the South, not the damn people in the South, the at the time, what would be the billionaires today in the South. That benefited them, and it benefited them to get into this war with the North on those predicates. So that way they could, it was a woke war is what it was. It was a woke war. And they did this culture war thing instead of a class war thing, because the Southerners, the rich slave owning Southerners, knew that they had to convince the poor people, who were basically indentured servants to them economically, not literally in the way of slavery, but they were in debt to them by property, by company stores, by town tax, county tax, this sort of thing. That the movie, I think it's called The State of Jones.
Well, now I'm going to have to see it.
That's great.
Because I haven't seen that. When I see somebody here
based on true story,
Chris Duggan here. This is fantastic. Your ancestor, my ancestor, Robert Gould Shaw. I mean, if you haven't seen Glory, you'll know who Robert Gould Shaw was. Fought and died in the Civil War. I mean, in Glory, he led the first black platoon of soldiers. And I mean, that's one of, again, it's a movie like Schindler's List. It's a movie like Amistad. It's a movie, I'm trying to think of them, the ones that you absolutely have to see that are amazing and are heart-wrenching at the same time. I mean, that scene, Denzel Washington, when he's being whipped and he like the tears coming. Oh, he won an Academy. I think that was his first Academy Award, but Morgan Freeman, Matthew Broderick played your ancestor. I bring up often that not my ancestor, but I'm pretty damn proud of this. I married into it. My wife's ancestor is Ulysses S. Grant, who for a while they smeared the early historians who believed in the great lost cause and wanted to make it that the North had been evil. If you ever see, what do you call it? Gone with the Wind. And you know how they portray the Northerners as evil and the Southerners had this nice genteel society and all of that. That was based on that line of history, that we were the aggressors, the wall of Northern aggression, and that they were, my wife's ancestor, Ulysses S. Grant, who was to the left of Lincoln, not only a great general, but to the left of Lincoln on racial issues, who, when he was president, is the only time when we were electing black members of Congress, governors, senators, where he enforced full flat out full equality, and they had to discredit him. So they turned him into a drunk, and they turned him into a, this and a that, and all these names that they called Grant. And he's one of those that more recent historians have looked at. And at one point, I think he probably was in like the bottom, half of presidents. And a more recent thing I saw, they had him up at like number 12 or something. I mean, he's been rising up because he actually wanted us to live up to our promise after the Civil War.
Right. Well, and it's been a long time since I've seen Glory, but it is. I know that it is a magnificent movie.
Oh, what a great
but I was
movie.
wrong about the name of the. It's called Free State of Jones. It's called Free State
I'm going
of
to see it
Jones.
because I heard of it.
Jonathan put it in, and I'm sure several others too, but they put it in the chat there. Free State of Jones.
So there's that and the one or two other things before I forgot I wanted to say to folks, because things can go in different directions. Is that I take a look at the fall of the British Empire, which was somewhat violent, but actually aspects of it were peaceful. Canada, like Australia, other places which technically are still under the crown, but where they're just like, go do your own thing. We're kind of done. Obviously, there was the revolution here. Obviously, there was a lot of violence in India. I'm not claiming it all went smoothly and was wonderful. I'm just claiming that at least it wasn't, like the French Revolution. Is all I'm getting at, the fall of the empire. And then, honestly, I really do believe at this point, I hate saying it, but if you don't know Roman history,
you think we're there?
I mean, we're, as Francie says here, I mean, the rule of history, I mean, I hate to say this again, I don't want people getting all upset and whatever, but no democracy yet in the history of the world has ever lasted forever. And no empire has ever lasted forever. So
I mean,
it doesn't mean it can't. And it doesn't mean that we can't have, what I'm hoping for is if we can get Trump and the worst people out of there, is we can have what I would call a softer landing, where maybe other folks step up more and we deal with all of our internal issues and realize we've been overextending, overspending because of corruption, because of lobbyists, because of this, because of that, billionaire class, whatever, and right the ship and do it in a hopefully mostly peaceful way, which numerous empires actually have done.
Well, right? And I think that's because I brought up Curtis Yarvin. If you haven't heard of Curtis Yarvin this morning,
I hate him.
Yeah,
dude, if you go into, I don't know if it's news or one of those places, he's got one of the top Substacks, which makes me want to hurl.
Yeah, but, well, and I will say that he is a danger to ideals in our democracy, but everyone needs to be well versed on who Curtis Yarvin is and what Curtis Yarvin's his theories are, because I believe that's what's playing out. And I think they want a technocratic dictatorship is what they want.
They want rule by AI.
Right. And honestly, and you're right. I know. I agree. And I think the more we know that, and the more we know what their aims are, we know what these moves are, we know what's BS and what we should actually be paying attention to. And
to be clear about it, that's why Musk and this group of other idiots, Sachs, Thiel, and all of them, besides thinking that a deep white supremacy built into it from the fact a lot of them are from South Africa, this little group, they think they're better than everybody else. They think they're smarter, and they think we should be ruled by the better and the smarter. But they also think that we don't need nearly as much government because AI can take its place, which clearly it can't, because we're seeing things right now that tell you it can't.
Right. Well, and also I the reason why I want people to be aware of Curtis Yarvin is because the more we say his name, the more prominent he will become. And the more prominent he will become, the more his ideals will be shuffled out into the discourse. And when his ideas are shuffled out into the discourse, it's going to absolutely piss off Americans.
We should do that and tie it to him. I mean, tie them.
Yeah, sure. And I actually wrote a Substack. My Substack this morning with my lead story was about him. I'm going to keep writing about him.
Substack.
That's right. I'm going to keep writing about him, and I'm going to keep blasting him. And if it's my mission, I will make Curtis Yarvin the most unpopular person in America.
And it'll be helpful, honestly, because I mean, obviously what you do will be helpful, but what's helpful is, as you know, with anything branding, something unusual, Curtis Yarvin is not David Smith, which, by the way,
Right.
is the name of one
Right.
of the.
It's
is
the
the
same
name
thing
of
as like Elon Musk and Donald Trump. It's easy to remember that name.
Right. Then David Smith is actually the head honcho at Sinclair Broadcast, who's an evil effer too. But because his name is David Smith, a lot of people will
It's
never
hard to
remember
attack
it,
him, right? Yeah, right.
right?
Well, and it's hard
Whereas,
to attack him. It's hard to know which David Smith. There's like a
right,
million of them.
right, it's pretty easy to remember Curtis Yarvin, just the way it's easy to remember Elon Musk. It's either easy to remember Peter Thiel. It's easy to remember Donald Trump. These are not like names everybody has. And again, I'll leave it at this because I do have to leave in a minute or two.
Yeah.
The messaging aspect of this is so important. What we've failed at in the past, and I won't get into a broader conversation because we failed at a number of things, obviously. But one of the things we failed at is look at what they did, and they played. Of course, they played on anti-Semitism and all this stuff with George Soros. We have never Koch brothers to a certain degree, where they got booed at like the American History Museum. They put money in New York and some of that stuff, but we have never made them infamous so that everybody. Elon Musk is doing a great job of doing that to himself right now. But we should make them famous. Like whenever people would attack the NRA, when I was fighting that battle, I'd be like, yes, attack the NRA. But right after that, say Wayne LaPierre, their head guy, and Chris Cox, their head lobbyist. Because if those guys can go about watching American children get destroyed and can still live a normal life, we're failing. They should be hissed at. They should be, nothing violent. They should feel uncomfortable in public, though, that everybody's looking at them and freaking hates them. And that's the way it should be with Peter Thiel. And that's the way it should be with Elon Musk. And that's the way it should be with Curtis Yarvin. Make them famous. More importantly, make them infamous. Use those names, attach pictures, do it. That is what I would say. People you normally know, I normally do a little dance on the way out where I do my, who's coming with me from Jerry Maguire to ask for one or two super chats or super stickers on the way out. But I don't believe we have that kind of time. So you guys are just going to have to choose to be lovely human beings and decide if you want to give me something on the way out. I'm just glad Tony got to hang the whole time, that we had such a fascinating conversation. And this is why, over at Substack and other places, why, they were asking me the other day, like, well, are you just labeling yourself U.S. politics? And I'm like, I want to be labeled history too, because I enjoy having history conversations. I want to be labeled world politics. Because
how the hell are you supposed to know about politics without knowing history? I think that's what gives me an advantage sometimes, that people underestimate me. They think I'm just some dumb hick. And
there we go. And Robin's going.
And then they actually at the very end, they realize that Tony has done a little bit of studying. History was actually one of my favorite subjects. It still is.
Fancy too. Yeah. Well, dude, you do a great job, and actually, it's necessary for you to play the. I'm just from the Ozarks here.
Right. Exactly.
We need that.
Exactly.
We need regular folks on our side. Make it the same way you can take the argument to regular folks and win them over. I can speak from my experience about these elite a-holes who make up our media these days and whatever, and talk about some of whom I actually knew as a kid, and point out where I know motivates them when they try to hide it and pretend. Thank you, Sheldon, as always, man. Sheldon is a regular with these. It's fantastic. Very kind. But I try to constantly remind people of all of that stuff, because I know what they talk about in their country clubs. I know what they value. And it's been a big part of the problem with our media. And it may be why I get so angry at corporate media, even more so than some other people, because I know the people there. And, I don't know them all personally, but I know a decent number of them. And I knew a bunch of them literally as a kid. I was in school with them. And to see them grow up and turn into this and care about nothing but their station in life and their little elitist, I work for the New York Times and, things like that. They know better. And it makes me hate them more. So that's where it comes from. So we each have our purposes, I guess, is what I'm getting at here.
I absolutely agree. I agree. And I haven't stuck around to the end of this show ever. So
I know.
I'm excited.
So do you want to? I usually give my my phrase. Oh, no, I can't let you give yours because you're gonna.
No, I can't. No, I can't.
Off.
No, I know.
So I will take both of us off the show at the same time. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you for being engaged and being awesome and being supportive of all I do here. And all Tony does. I will be back tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel, 2 p.m. Eastern. And as the sun sets slowly in the west, I bid you a fond farewell.